Шановні колеги і колежанки, шановні
Dear colleagues, dear participants of this press conference, everybody who is listening to us online, those who have joined us, welcome to the press conference on the registration of the draft laws on the introduction of the interest deduction mechanism to support non-profit organizations in Ukraine. This press conference is taking place in the hybrid form. It's broadcast in the Facebook, and you are welcome to leave your questions either here on the Facebook platform or on the platform of the Overinform. I am the director of the initiative from the organization called the Rule of Law, and we are working with the framework of the initiative of sector support of civil society, including the Center for Promotion of Unity called Yednanya and the Ukrainian Independent Center for Political Studies. I believe all the speakers have joined us. Technically speaking, as a moderator, I have a request to make. Since Ukraine is in the martial law, as well as the whole territory of Ukraine is an endangered one. Once you hear the air raid signal, you have to move toward the safe place and you will be able to see the broadcast of this press conference. You are not going to lose any piece of information. Because of this fact that the time is limited to an hour and a half, we will be grateful for your questions online, as I have already said. The regulation for today's meeting is 7-minute framework for every speaker, and the first one to join and given the floor is Ms. Maria Galati, the deputy head from the Unity Initiative. Will you please inspire us and inform us on how we have gotten where we are and where the mechanism for the interest deduction is? Welcome, everybody. Glad to hear and see everybody. I would like to begin with the words that I am so happy for this opportunity to take place when we are talking about the draft laws in the parliament. When we initiated this movement financed by the USA, there were a lot of discussions where we were ready as the citizens of this country to enjoy such a mechanism to support the non-profit organizations. It was a complicated process. There were people who said that, yes, we are ready, those who said we were not. As the expertise in fundraising for the Ukrainian army to meet the needs of the people who have suffered in the course of the war, we are seeing that the Ukrainian society is ready for different kinds of contributions. We are ready to support the initiative that we believe in. We are ready to finance those initiatives that will be the game changer, to make sure that people are persuaded to contribute and donate their money. I would like to thank the members of parliament, Mr. Grishu, who was the driver of this process. He joined us in developing this mechanism. He supported us all the way. And basically, due to his support, this is where we have reached this final lap. This is a complicated time. The draft law will be submitted to the parliament, and I hope that the members of parliament will support this initiative in a positive way. Well, you know, as a Ukrainian society, as a Ukrainian civil society, we are the wonder of the world. When we talk to our international partners, they say, although you are in the grip of war, you are working as if there were no war taking place. So what we are doing is we are implementing what seemed to be implausible in the peaceful time. We have reached a goal that will lead to the renovation of Ukraine. Thank you very much for all the stakeholders, and I hope that in a very short period of time, this mechanism will be working in Ukraine. Thank you, Maria, for your welcome address and for thanking the international partners. It is important that such initiatives are read in the parliament. I would like to give the floor to the director of the Center for the Rule of Law and Democracy, Alessia Holobik. I think she's got the full picture on this mechanism. Welcome, dear participants of today's event. Before I begin, I would like to thank all the defenders who are in all the fronts, military front, informational front. We are discussing today one of the best initiatives in support of the non-profit sector. The idea of this initiative is not a new one. It has been discussed for a number of years. We made an attempt to get it registered, but we have seen the activization, a new lease of life of this initiative at the end of 2019. People who are present here, including our organization, different centers, the Tabletочка, Come Back Alive, Center for Political and Judicial Reform, the package of reforms, together with the members of parliament, launched a discussion of the need for such an implementation of such a mechanism. The presentation that we are looking at today is the result of a lot of work when we took on board international expertise. You know, we began with a book, was looking into the concepts with the inclusion of as many stakeholders as possible. What was the best way to launch it, when to launch it, how to launch it. This is the result that we see in these draft laws. What we are seeing today is in the civil sector, non-profit organization are helping both the military and the civilians of Ukraine to confront the challenges of war, while developing this draft law and looking into how to best to submit it to the parliament. We thought that we want to lay the basis for the civil society to work in the future. This is why I believe that our mutual work and the launch and the advancement of this draft law in the parliament must end in a positive result. To conclude, I would like to thank Mr. Rahman, our Member of Parliament, for his constant, unfailing support in the belief of this instrument to promote this idea, and I believe that together we will reap the results. I thank all the members of Parliament who registered this draft law in the Parliament, and I hope that in the future the Parliament will work on this, will improve it, but the most important part for this draft bill to be implemented into life. Thank you. Indeed, it is difficult to enlist all the participants in this initiative. We have heard about the civil society. I have the list here that includes no less than 39 organizations, including 39 members of parliament who signed this draft law registered by Mr. Rahman. A special note on this. Since the very beginning, Alona Shkrum, Halina Vasilchenko, and Alexandra Sanchenko, and Yaroslav Rascheshin, and other members of parliament helped us, and we are appreciative of that. I believe this is the example of the cooperation on how to work on this draft bill in the future. I would like to give the floor to Gleb Kolesov, who is the judicial expert from the center, and he will enlighten us on the mechanisms of what this legislation implies in the future in Ukraine. Thank you. Gleb Kolesov, the judicial officer at the Center for the Rule of Law, one of the participants of the big team that has been working on the big dream but we are now seeing the reality when 2 draft laws have been registered at the parliament. To begin from the very beginning, I would like to have a presentation on screen. Well, I should begin with the idea of the mechanism of interest deduction, which is the idea that people can make a choice to deduct up to 20% of their income in favor of civil, religious, or non-profit organizations for their growth, for their work, for the implementation of their plans for the good of the Ukrainian society. How will the mechanism work? How does it stipulate in the legislation? So the amount is up to 22% per year of deductions. Who will be the recipients? Religious organizations, non-profit organizations. Who is going to pay? Any person, the Ukrainian or a person without a nationality, will be able to deduct the money and to transfer money to the cause of the civil society. We've been working on this for about 3 years, beginning with the concept, and then we implemented in the draft laws. And these include simple steps. First, we will submit an electronic request, either electronically or you will apply to the local tax authorities, a person who wants to deduct some money to the non-profit organizations. And another option is to request through the DIA mechanism. It's a simple one-click procedure when you can transfer your money to the charity foundation Tabletочки. Now, what we envisage here, these are 2 draft laws, 7500 and 7501. One talks about the amendments to the tax code and to the budget code of Ukraine. Of course, the laws will not be enough. What we see here is the need to implement this through all the sub-laws and other legislation framework laws, including the register of the recipients and register of the payers. And we'll see how it works in practice, including some of the decrees by the Ministry of Finance, the development of the different instructions in the tax authority mechanism to administer this process efficiently. Currently, we have registered 2 draft laws on the amendments to the budget code. As for the tax amendments, we want to have a clear definition what is an interest deduction and the responsibility of the authorities for not inclusion of the organizations into the register once a citizen applies and he's not granted such a place in the register. And another way is the procedure on how it's done on the level of the legislation, that is on the code of taxation. So we are talking about the interest deductions. The Treasury will be able to transfer such monies, such allocations that will be given over to the NGOs at the request of the taxpayer who have expressed such a desire. The tax code will also have to include these accounts on the monthly reporting system, including the income of persons, including the territory of the Republic of Crimea, because Crimea is a Ukrainian territory. So, as I have mentioned, we will set up a number of bylaws leading to the decree by the Cabinet of Ministers, including the register of the units beneficiaries. And Ministry of Finance, the tax administration, Treasury will also have to respond to this initiative. How will this be working in practice? How the interest deduction mechanism will work? The concept that we have embodied in the draft laws and then will be reflected in the bylaws, the interest deduction mechanism is very simple. Of course, non-profit organizations must be registered in the list or register of the recipients, which is done at their own will. Then the tax authorities will check the criteria that have to be met, whether such NGOs can be recipients of the interest deduction. And I emphasize here that we are not complicating the whole process. It is called to be very simple. Criteria are very simple for any organization, in any corner of Ukraine, to be able to be in the process. Then the taxpayer requests, either electronically or through the DIA mechanism, the tax authority will take advantage of the new legislation to check the organization whether they are qualified to receive such monies. Then the tax authority will inform the taxpayer whether his papers have been processed. Then the tax authority will inform the Treasury. The Treasury will work on the accounts and the organizations will receive such money. And in its term, the Treasury will publish the information on the register of the recipients, whether they have received such transfer and whether everything is okay. Now, to be sure, all this has to be reflected in the legislation, in the bylaws, in what I have mentioned as the future decree by the Cabinet of Ministers. Such allocations will be spelled out, including the territorial taxation authorities and the central treasury. They will have to define what is the idea behind the aggregate register. A very important nuance here is the assurances to enjoy the possibility to apply for the second time. Once your request has been turned down, you must have an opportunity to rectify your mistakes. And then we'll have to see how the mechanism of how NGO receives money when this organization is in the register, is excluded from the register, and so on. The register politics. We have to know what the register is, what is the responsibilities of the state taxation authorities, the inclusion and exclusion process of the nonprofit organization. To avoid complications, we want this process to be open and transparent. This is what our efforts are targeting. Basically, we want to have the transparency in all the state organizations, including taxation authorities. So we believe there must be no place for the abuse or embezzlement here. Another way is in terms of the nonprofit organizations, those who will be willing to be part of the register. The information that they will have to put in the public domain will be their bank account numbers, their accounting information, the taxation information, the information of the inclusion or exclusion from the list, the name of the director, and the website information if there is one. We want to make sure that NGOs are as open and transparent as possible because they counteract with the Ukrainian civilians. And people are entitled to know, and they're interested to know, that the NGOs are transparent in their interactions with the ordinary Ukrainians for the better good of this country. Thank you, Gleb. What you have done is amounting to the impossible. You were short, transparent, and easy to understood. Apart from the practical things, the legislation also is targeting the changes in value paradigm. We are working with the civil society. The mechanism will expand the sustainability in terms of financial, and the cornerstone is the people's power. Thank you. I think the values of the society is well ahead of the legislation. I would like to thank all the 39 members of parliament. They include all the factions in the parliament, excluding one. In other words, we have across the board ambassadors who are promoting this legislation. This is a non-party process. We have two superpowers. One superpower is civil society, and another is the culture of donation that has seen an unprecedented pace. Almost half of the ministry budget of the Ministry of Defense was covered by the donations. So in terms of values, we are well ahead of the legislation. This is to say that the NGOs is the driver of reforms. Volunteer organizations, public organizations are flexible in resolving the problem that the state takes very long time to go, as the first month of war have indicated. These draft laws, and most importantly, the matter is not in the draft laws themselves, but the victory of the power of people. When I say in my income statement which organizations I would like to transfer my money to, either in support of some socially vulnerable strata, as a responsible Ukrainian citizen, I have to be able to enjoy such a mechanism. This is a mechanism, and better still, a digitized one. When through the DA mechanism, you know which part of your donations have gone to the state budget, to the revenues of the non-profit organizations, which is to say that the budget of Ukraine is our common responsibility when we together decide which items are being financed. Another thing is that we are not talking about non-profit or religious organizations. We should be thinking about those people that are in need of support. So I believe religious organizations should be part and parcel of this process. Maria said the word final lap. I don't see eye to eye. We have only managed to get to the starting point. We are facing a very difficult time ahead. The budgetary committee in the parliament, the parliamentary committee on state budget, they will be difficult to be persuaded. We must step up our work. The way that the financial committee or the taxation committee in the parliament are saying that this is all comes down to the expenditures from the state budget, they have to be persuaded for the relevance of this. So this is only a starting point. And the finishing line is not only bylaws or legislation or the introduction. The final lap will be when the culture of interest deduction will be something that we take for granted, and we will not be able to remember the times when that process was not in place. So we are only at the starting point. There's a lot of work to be done in the future, but taking into account the way Ukrainian society has shown itself, this is the minimum that we can do at the parliament, at the state level, at the level of the public organizations. Thank you. This is a most powerful message for both for the parliament, for the public sector. And in the parliament, they have united and rallied behind this idea. They have agreed that this is the high time. In the martial law, I will remind you, only the parliament takes on board only those initiatives that seem to be very urgent. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Vasil Poluyko. He represents the Mazepa Foundation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This is a bridge how to expand this mechanism towards non-profit religious organizations. What do you think will be the impact of this initiative? Welcome, everybody. It has reminded me of the fact that this event should have taken place on the day that the war broke out. So I am emotionally touched, and I wish victory to all of us and peaceful skies above our heads. But just before this roundtable discussion took place, we had a small sitting together with the Bishop Yevstraki, and we were discussing the topic of how to discuss all this religious aspect. I will tell a few words about faith-based organizations and what my take on this is. When we talk about religious organization, the vision is that the recipients of such an aid must be religious organizations that are represented through their religious centers. In simple words, the recipients should not include every small church in Ukraine. And I think this is a unified position here. Another way to look at this is that beyond the church parishes, the religious organization promote the idea that based faith organizations are equal with the non-profit organization. That is to say, 80% for the good deeds and 20% for the administrative management. Another way that we should take into account, I think it should be discussed in the future or detailed in the future. The citizens must not form a notion that the state finances religious organizations. We know that this is not the case, but there is one, shall I say, not a threat, but one factor that might be contributing to it, and that is the money that we collect are coming through the state budget. Another way that the state is an intermediary here. And there are some risks here. Imagine we live up to the end of the year, the budget has not been fulfilled, the money has been fulfilled, but the idea is that we use a question, who comes first, who comes second, when budget expenditures are thought of, or if we might save some money and not finance NGOs. So I would here think about the direct financing, either as a physical person or as an entrepreneur, to implement this mechanism of interest deduction for charity activities. In this way, we can avoid additional risks. Another point from the public sector that I have said, but before that, the very fact that we are discussing the draft clause on the interest deduction for charity is an indicator of the development of the civil society, its self-organization, and its institutionalization as a separate sector. I would like now to come down to the criteria that should guide the bodies that will be the recipients of these money. In the public center, we all know about the pseudo NGO or pseudo charity organizations. This criteria should not be too simplified. For these pseudo NGOs to be part or recipients of these donations. I think this is the mechanism that we should be working on in the future. I also think that this is one of the factors that should help us to promote the civil society to be more self-organized. Yes, we can organize the public in large, but a lot must be done for us to get organized ourselves. This is what I wanted to share with you, and thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vasily. We are appreciative of your challenges that you have voiced. Of course, we have a very good toolbox of the check mechanisms to defend the reputation of the integrity of our organizations in the environment of the full-scale war by the Russian Federation. This is another additional factor to get these bills registered in the parliament right now. People, the Ukrainian society, are looking at the champions of the civil society. They know, they have made up their mind. After we have achieved the victory, people know that they will support this wave of support for key organizations, both religious, non-profit, and NGOs that are working currently for the sake of the Ukrainian victory. Let me also tell you that we have planned a speech by one of the members of parliament, but he turned out to be too busy, and we have a video link and his video address by Yaroslav Rusheshin on this legislation. Dear colleagues, thank you for the organization of what appears to be a very important event. My point on this is as follows. During my parliamentary experience, I've been working a lot on these issues, and we've conducted a lot of research and surveys. What we have seen is that in parallel, when we see the horizontal trust in the society, what we lack is the vertical trust, the trust to the power that be. Such a trust is a very low level. How can we restore such a level? One of the avenues to go is when a Ukrainian, a citizen, must be the owner of the idea of statehood. We don't have such a mechanism. When a simple Ukrainian feels the owner of the institution that we call the state of Ukraine, and in such a way, a citizen is not ready to take on the responsibility for the state of Ukraine. And the mechanism that we are discussing today is the way to renew the emotional link between a Ukrainian is managing the budgetary money in terms of his or her own will to contribute, and such a way is to restore the link between the Ukrainian citizenry and the trust between the citizenry, the general public, and the state. And this responsibility will lead to the controlling functions in terms of seeing whether the money has been spent on the goals that have been expressed. But this is how we review how the way the state spends our revenues, our taxes. So this is very important to implement this idea of philanthropy. But my suggestion and proposal, in addition to these draft bills, when we look into the organizations that are recipients of these donations, you will see that these include charity and religious organizations. As a rule, they have to do with the forming of the ethical core of society. And this has to do with the education. Education is the center of the family and the education process, the schools and the universities. So I would like you to look into the educational establishments and the recipients. This will also include and generate the competition in the market of a healthy process of competition in the market of the educational services. When private institutions are competing with the state institutions, this will also decrease the tax burden on the Ukrainian student or a pupil from the state-run universities, and thus will eradicate corruption. So I will challenge you to expand the idea of philanthropy towards educational establishment. Thank you and good luck. What can I respond? We see that the implementation of the interest deduction mechanism can be expanded. Once we have implemented the basic instrument and it starts working, and we input into our ideal concept, we will include then other items and subjects. I would like to give the floor to Vyacheslav Bykov, the executive director of the charity organization Tabletochka. They've been working with the donations to fighting cancer of children, and they have been a driving force behind this legislation. They know the challenges of today's civil society. I am aware of the fact that this organization has managed to look charity steps to look simple. So I would like you to share with us what are the additional steps here for the regional or local initiatives, how to use the money that the charity organizations will receive as the result of this mechanism. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everybody who have joined us today. I would like to provide my vision as the leader of the charity organization that's been working for a decade now, and also as a financier who is working in the Ukrainian market. Perhaps the Robin Hood is the favorite hero of any financial organization, because Robin Hood redistributes the revenues and expenditures. In this way, the NGOs are no different. The charity organizations are called to provide aid or finances to meet the needs at a specific location as quick as possible, as soon as possible, and as efficient as possible. My starting point is that when I started working on the interest deduction, the question was why the state would be interested in it. how urgent this problem is. Now, it's a long time since at the state level we have been discussing the issue of division or redistribution of taxation. You will see on the picture that 40% of the charity goes to the local authorities, 60% go to the state budget. This is to say that there are donations, but the community doesn't receive any tangible. And why is that? It is because your hospitals are in the ownership of the local authority. So the hospitals must be financed from the local budget. Of course, we have a national health system. And I should congratulate everybody here on the fact that on the 9th of July, the government has approved a more than 1 billion hryvnia grant to finance the national health system. But if your hospital wants to buy some equipment, they will not be able to procure such an equipment. You see, a new microscope, a new building, new surgical instruments, you cannot purchase or procure. This is why it is important for the community to intervene and say, look, what we want our taxation to be targeted to is the local hospital. Now, the second diagram, what you see here is the experience not of our Tabletочки Charity Foundation. Some percentage comes from the charity from specific persons. If you think in terms of big corporations, you are mistaken. The people who pay such allocations are simple Ukrainians. On the third picture, you see that 30% of the aggregate state budget is paid for by, not by citizens. The persons and their income taxation is a little part of that. As a rule, when we talk about the contributions of the physical persons, 80% is what we receive. We don't see the taxation here, but taxation amounts to 20% of such donations. And when we raise up this threshold, we will empower the public organizations. If you look at the next slide, the figures here don't seem to add up. State budget, the revenue is about 1.5 trillion hryvnias. 2% of these are accounted for by the taxation payers. The Ministry of Finance must not oppose such actions because the question will be what will compensate for such losses. And the question is whether such losses must be compensated. 2% of the taxation paid by the persons. Let us imagine that 1/3 of this tax brackets will amount to the yellow part of this pie, if you are able to see it. Look at the yellow part of the pie. In the state budget, with the 1.5 trillion hryvnias, this is a minuscule amount, but for the private sector, this is 2.2 billion hryvnias. What is 2.2 billion hryvnias for the public organizations? Conditionally speaking, this is the state need to procure the cancer-related medicines for children. This is 170 to 160 million of our charity organization. This is the capability of the philanthropy activities, given that only 1/3 of the taxation is directed there. If we do what we have planned for, this will be enough to buy new ambulances, to cure new children, and to buy new equipment. I would like to go back to where I will conclude. So the matter of expanding the pie of distribution and redistribution of our taxes. Indeed, what matters here in the mechanism for public organization is engagement. Engagement from the benefactor, a benefactor living in the local community, seeing the needs of the local hospital, in the needs of the local roads. When they see and appreciate the problems, right there, they can get engaged. Engaged not from their own pockets, but you can show to the state, to the local authorities, to whole Ukraine, I want you to resolve the issues of my city, of the health problems, of the amenity issues in my location. So the engagement issue is the sphere where the NGOs will mostly benefit. These are very persuasive figures. Of course, we touched upon the issue of the people of Ukraine are so generous in crowdfunding, in collecting the money, as witnessed by the process of buying Bayraktars UAVs. When these figures become a reality, everyone will see where these monies are spent on. We've got a lot of statistical data here, but it makes sense to know what is the expertise of such initiatives abroad in other European countries. That's why I would like to give the floor to the lawyer of the SADAM organization. She's got a lot of information to us. Indeed, I would like to begin from the point that the interest deduction mechanism is not something new. This instrument of interest deduction is well known in the European countries. This is what I would like to talk about in detail. On the slides, you see the information how this interest deduction mechanism is used in the European countries. It is worth noting that such a mechanism to finance charity organization is not necessarily a major source of their finances, but this is a finance mechanism to get engaged citizens into the process of distribution of their taxes, and this also promotes the mechanism of overviewing the distribution process from the state budgets to meet the needs of bigger society. So there are a lot of benefits in this mechanism, not only in terms of the money received by some organizations. In Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Moldova, Romania, and other countries, their experience say that there are a lot of advantages here, because its use and utilization is not only in terms of the charity activities or religious activities, it's also a mechanism of impacting your community, your state, your local authorities. The charity activities is a very specific way to help, for example, children with oncological diseases. This is where you can make a informed choice. This is potentially a tool to gather and gauge the public opinion, what the public thinks are the most important issues. The countries where we have interest deduction mechanisms are following different avenues. As you see on the slide, we have depicted 7 countries here, but they have in common a number of traits. One is the amount of deduction. It is in the frame between 1 and 2% paid by the physical persons. Who are the beneficiaries? These are non-profit institutions and organizations. In the third place, NGOs, religious organizations, and the draft bill 7500 and 7501 are targeting especially these organizations. A third point is the deduction mechanism for the account of some organization. This must be a personal choice of a person. The taxpayer must make his or her mind which organization he or she will choose. In Romania or Hungary, the documentation must include the beneficiary. In Ukraine, we have all the factors for person to indicate a specific organization for the reception of this money. This is where we have to communicate between the authorities or the future of the application gear in this respect. Very likely a taxpayer will be able to implement all the set of actions to provide such a donation. The instrument will be no less important. I'm thinking about Italy, where the instrument was initiated back in the 90s or 80s. In the neighboring Moldova, they initiated such a mechanism in 2017. And the specifics of that process in Moldova will be covered by our friend from Moldova. But at this point, I would like to emphasize that there is a unique opportunity for us to take on board all the positive lessons and to avoid all the mistakes of our friends and to make sure that we evade such negative practices in these mechanisms when we analyze what they have done in Moldova and their expertise in this interest deduction instrument. I think we are moving in the right direction. The NGOs in the environment of full-scale war have shown that they can be trusted, and the people have shown that they can make a right decision in the selection of the organization that they entrust their money with. Thank you. Thank you for the practical side of the story and for the inspiring side of your speech. You know, when the legal aspects can talk about the legal aspects, and the legal aspects, of course, is very important here. Thank you for suggesting a bridge to our next speaker. Of course, it is very important for us to hear from our friends from Moldova. They have initiated this mechanism quite recently, and they've been co-working with the state bodies. And this is where we hope we will also be able to build such bridges with the state authorities. I am saying about the taxation service. That's why I would like to give the floor to the representative of the Analytical Center of Moldova and the program director, Ilie Kirtoaka. Ilya, would you tell us how come you have been so successful and resultful in your work? And what actually are the first results? What is your estimation of what you have achieved and what you are likely to achieve in the future?
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. I'm delighted to be with you at this press conference to discuss the percentage designation mechanism. I will say as a disclaimer in the beginning that the fact that we now have a 2% law, it is of course a joint effort of Moldovan civil society, but also religious organizations that were advocating for this mechanism to happen in Moldova. I do have a presentation about the mechanism, and I hope you see it, and I'll put it on my screen. And I would like to touch upon very shortly about our pursuit, the lesson learned, and what can be done in order to improve the mechanism. We, of course, as you colleagues mentioned, looked at other countries who already had the mechanism: Hungary, Polonia, Poland, Romania, another country which are already successfully implementing the percentage mechanism in Moldova. Our main features of the mechanism are the following. We had a discussion about the 2% law, where a bit earlier than 2010. However, the first result, our first gain was in 2014, where we managed to advocate for the adoption of the amendments in the fiscal code. However, until a proper governmental mechanism was there to explain every detail of the mechanism and how it is implemented, we took almost 2.5 years. So basically, we managed to succeed of having the whole legal framework by 2016. It was first applied in 2017 based on the revenues from 2016. So basically, we can say it, but the organization were registered already in 2016. So we could say that the mechanism is available since 2016. It's an indirect state funding, as you mentioned already, colleagues, and the source base is the income tax, 2%. It is conditioned in our country by the income tax return. I'm very delighted to hear that in Ukraine you have already in place electronic mechanisms such as the DIA platform. This helps very much in order to make the mechanism workable, because the easier the process is, the more designation you can receive. This is at least the example of Moldova. In our country, it happens every year from January to April. There are two types of beneficiaries. CSOs, basically the main three non-profit organization forms that there are. These are public associations, these are foundations, and these are private institutions, meaning all non-profit forms, but also religious cults and their component parts. There are very low requirements for potential beneficiaries. I will speak in a bit about it. And this is very important for allowing, at least in the first years of the mechanism, to not make the entry into this mechanism very burdensome, because there is a challenge. If it will complicate, the organization will not be eager to participate. And both in Moldova, the income declaration can be filled out both online and offline, and this very much helps the process of designating 2%. And basically the rule is, in Moldova, if you pay income tax, you can designate 2%. So basically you cannot designate 2% from pensions, from student stipend, because that income is not taxed. And this is important when you go into the next stage of making promotion campaigns and know who your potential donor is. In Moldova, the mechanism works in a 4-year cycle. Basically, you start by registering yourself as an organization at the public service agency. Then there is a 3 or 4 month process going when this registration happens. And every January, in the beginning of the year, there's a list published. So basically, every year you have the new list of organizations who can receive this amount of 2%. Now, if you already registered once, you don't need to do it twice. So basically, once you are in that list, you can always receive this money unless you don't want anymore. Then you have the designation period, which is the same period when the people file income tax return. And basically, if the registration process starts in September, the year before, in the 1st of January, you have the list, then you have 4 months when people designate 2%, and the money comes to the specified organization by September. After this, you have 2 years in order to spend the money, and after 2 years, you have 3 months to report it. But basically, if you calculate everything, you receive more than 5 years. This is 4 years. Sorry, this is a full cycle of 2% loan, and we should take this into account because each year a new cycle starts. I already mentioned that NGOs, public associations, foundations, and private institutions can enter the mechanism, and also the religious denomination and their component parts. They have no requirements to enter, at least 1 year of activity before registering the list, and they should not have debts to the national budget for the previous fiscal years. They also need to carry out public benefit activities if they are NGOs, and moral, social, and charitable activities if they are churches. Now, this is I would say this is a very easy to fill in requirement. Basically, if you are not a closed club of where your activities are directed only to your members, it is a high chance that you perform public benefit activities, whether this is education, human rights, social security, environment, and other issues. Now, there are more than 4 public authorities involved in this mechanism in Moldova. So there is a regulation that states who are the public authorities responsible, and it is very important to make sure that they collaborate with each other, because otherwise the mechanism will not work. And this was one of the challenges why the mechanism was on paper until 2014, but not applied until 2016 in Moldova. So there is the first agency, which is the Public Service Agency. This is usually the authority which gives you passports or basically takes the evidence of the population. It is also responsible for registering NGOs and therefore registering the NGOs to the mechanism. There is another, they also validate who are the organizations who are eligible to participate, whether they have debts to the public budget or no. Also, they look if you perform these public benefit activities. The second authority is the tax authority. They are processing the tax income form and basically the 2% declaration. They also validate, because if you are a natural person and you want to designate 2%, but you have debts to the budget, like you didn't pay your taxes, you cannot designate 2%. There is also the state treasury, who after tax authority receives the designation and validate, they send the invoice to the state treasury, and the state treasury makes the disbursement of money. And last but not least, at the end of the cycle, when you used as a civil society organization the money, there is the financial inspection from the Ministry of Finance, who ensures the reporting and control. Why I am mentioning about these authorities, it is very important in order to have a lucrative mechanism to have either a single unit authority who is responsible, and this will be, of course, the very best scenario. But in case of Moldova, because of the public, because this is in the end of the day, public money which are taking from the state, and the taxpayer decides who to support, it will most likely involve the synergy and collaboration between public authorities. So you need to have them all on board. Now, in our country, the tax authority is the gatekeeper of the mechanism, basically validating designation. So it is very important to have them on board. And we had a very good collaboration with the tax authority because at once they understood how the mechanism works, and they managed to see what are the benefits. But there is also important to know how the mechanism is performing. So in Moldova, we managed to secure in this governmental regulation an attribution of the tax authority to inform annually about the results, to make a statistical report. And this statistical report envisaged a lot of interesting data. The profile of the donors, their age, where they're from, and basically this helps a lot civil society organizations to know to whom they should channel their message to ask for the 2% designation. I told you about this report. It is published on annual basis. It includes a lot of interesting data, especially for the NGOs, and it's very important to use it in order to improve the mechanism. For example, if you have a lot of unvalid designation, meaning there is something in the middle that prevents the organization from receiving the money. Either it is too burdensome, the completion of the declaration, or they don't do it right. So you need to, based on the numbers from the statistical point, you see that and you improve the mechanism each year. I will talk about very quickly about the benefits of the mechanism since it was put in place. And basically the one and foremost is that it brings some money, some new inflow of money into the system. Based on the first 5 years, it brought around 2 million euro. This is not a lot if you, if you see there are more than 10,000 civil society organizations. So basically there's not a lot of money. However, it's still some new inflow, and basically on the fact that we rely very much on donor support. Actually, this is a method in which civil society organizations can diversify funds, even if it's not a lot. But this is another a main benefit. Of course, there is better communication of CFSO and their perceived role in the society, because in order to get this 2%, you need to explain why, what are you doing, and basically this fatigue between NGOs funded from the West, we don't know what they are doing. This is in fact an avenue in which the NGOs or religious organizations go in the front, and they do promotion campaign and say, this is who I am, this is what I do, either this is charity, human rights, environment, or other things. This is why I want to benefit for 2%. This is what I will do with the money. So basically, in the society, there is more awareness about the third sector, what it is doing, and basically why and how people can support it. And this, of course, stimulates civic activism, because people know better about civil society organization, and they can, we have seen this on our own example, that person who is giving you the 2% will want to see what you have done with the money, but also if they're interested to know, they can support you in other ways, do volunteering, or come at your public events, or dedicate basically their own time and resources, make donations, and basically this stimulates civic activism in the long run, and this has been witnessed in Moldova. And we don't know yet for sure now, but based on the example of other countries, this mechanism should create a culture of philanthropy. So basically now I'm giving 2%, but in the next year, maybe I'll do other sort of form of donations, right? There are also challenges because low salaries in Moldova and basically 2% from the 12% income tax. This is a very, very modest designation. So from a salary of 50 euros, if you count 12%, this is 120 lei, and if you count 2% designation, it will be 12, which is more like a half a euro, right? This is not a lot of money. And basically, in order to have, it is important to calibrate our expectation of what the mechanism can bring. If you have a lot of people who designate, of course, you can get more money. There is no obligation to fill out the tax income form unless you have multiple sources of income. This is also a challenge because if you only work at one place, you are not obligated to fill out the tax income form. So basically, there are less than 10% of the taxpayer who designate 2%. There is no separate form of 2% designation, so it is linked to the income tax form, and this is a challenge because, for example, in Romania, you have a single formula which civil society can fill out for you, and you only sign and send it, and that's it. So basically, you make the designation easier. And the main beneficiaries in Moldova so far in the first 5 years are those who know the system. Basically, for the 5 years in a row, the first organization who gets all the money, the first place, so basically annually more than 60,000 euros per annum. This is the Veteran Association of the Ministry of Internal Affairs because, because of the hierarchy in this system of internal affairs, they did an internal audit and they said everyone needs to go to the tax authority and designate 2%. So they go there every year. And the second one is the Association of Former Workers of the Tax Service, who also, of course, know the system, and they also get annually a pretty fair amount of the money. These are just some examples of how NGOs promote themselves, and basically they need to fill in the tax, the fiscal code in order to get designation. And this is their message. This is an organization work on child support issues, but there is also organization working on, let's say, Amnesty International Moldova. They also have promotion campaigns on how to designate. I will end my presentation here, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. But in a nutshell, just to conclude, I would like to say that it is a great mechanism because it helps linking the bridge between society and civil society, between the state and civil society. It brings additional income to the sector, and it promotes philanthropy, and it can help with creating a culture of civic activism and support. Thank you.
Дякую, пане Ілія. Мені дуже подобається.
Thank you, Ilya. I very much enjoyed your last message in terms of bringing out a new generation of leaders. We think that people who are participating today in all the forms of non-profit organizations are people that will be driving changes in the future in all the countries. And indeed, we have a number of questions in the chat. For example, I will read out. Ilya, if you have a commentary, you are welcome to participate. But I would like to address Mr. Kolisov. I will read out the question from Ms. Alisa Palsko. Why is it 2%, not 5% or 10%. She follows on to say that these money should be transferred immediately to the organization. We should not be promoting red tape and democracy and bureaucratic mechanisms here. The simple answer can be offered. A complicated answer can be offered. I will go in between. Why is it 2%, not 5 or 10%? I think that all NGOs and religious organizations, public organizations, would be happy if they receive 10% of all the taxations from the state budget. But we know that we are talking about budget revenues, and this is one of the areas where individual taxation is one of the major contributions to the state budget that will, at the end of the day, go to the finances of the building and the reconstruction of this country, financing of the armed forces. 2%, shall I say, is a generally accepted practice that is used in Europe, in the countries that we have mentioned so far. It's either 2% or 1%. This is a golden medium when you don't impose a lot of burden on the state budget, for example, for the state budget of Ukraine, and at the same time you are able to support the non-governmental organizations. As for the bureaucracy, you see, red tape is a complicated issue, but the answer can be simple. You are right, this is our money, taxation is our money that we pay to the state. But the thing of the matter is that managing the taxation, administering the taxation is done by the state and by the bureaucracy. Unfortunately, operationally, we cannot get rid of bureaucracy. You cannot allocate your money to some specific organization. Whether for good or for bad, we cannot exclude the state here. But I will go back to my presentation. When we were developing, with my colleagues, with the members of parliament, when we were developing the concept of this mechanism as embodied in the draft clause, we targeted this simplification of bureaucracy. We want this mechanism to be simple for people. My colleagues have mentioned, and my colleague from Moldova, very important, has mentioned it. This is a matter of public awareness. People must know how the basic taxation works, what for their money is expended. Thank you, Gleb. But I will not let you go. My colleagues from Ukrinform are asking, Gleb Kolesov, for example, why is it that the entrepreneurs will be more interested in donating some money to the NGO rather than paying their taxes? Again, this is a matter of motivation NGOs. Once this mechanism has been launched and Moldovan experience, our neighbor and partner in our European aspirations, you see, we see a market in a good sense of the word, market in the NGO services. And it's not a matter of entrepreneurs being interested in donating. The NGOs will be interested in making people know what they are doing, how they are doing. They would like to, to pitch their message. If I am abusing the language of market, I'm doing that willingly. They have to pitch their message. They are interested in getting more money involved for the implementation of their projects. Thank you for this very clear-cut answer. Natalia or Gleb, who wants to answer this? Who will be running the register of the organizations in the public sector that will be beneficiaries and recipients. In general, we expect that this will be under the remit of the state taxation service. They will be running the register of the recipients of this interest deduction mechanism, and they will be processing the register. They will be inputting the information, so that will be basically taxation service. I think this will be the last question. Our time seems to be running out. Once the legislation is passed, will you include public organizations that will be set up in the smaller settlements or localities? Of course, it all will depend on the following factors. A very important factor that we seem to have missed out. This mechanism is not a compulsory one for the NGOs, for the religious organizations, or for the beneficiaries. This is all a volunteer activity. If an NGO, a religious organization, has a will to be included in the above-mentioned register, they will have to request such a plea. There are 3 or 4 criteria only. So in the taxation code, will define whether you are eligible for the receipt of such funds. And it also concerns all, with no exception, of the non-profit organizations that have been legislated to act in the territory of Ukraine. So the problem is not your size, whether in a small village or small settlement. Once you have such a desire, you can enter the process. Currently, we have exhausted questions from the floor. However, we see a very active participation online, and we are applauded, and people who have already started this activity, they receive very positive feedback from our viewers. Keep leaving your questions, keep talking to the Center for Democracy and the Civil Rights movements. To conclude, we have been talking a lot of things today about the interest deduction initiative, the path that we have covered, what we are still facing in terms of implementing this interest deduction idea. It all comes down to the following. Very soon, the Ukrainians will enjoy the possibility to manage their taxes. This is a alluring idea when we can control how our money is spent. Everyone in Ukraine should understand that there are organizations that can be trusted, either they are NGOs or religious organizations. They must know that these organizations into the cause of Ukraine, this mechanism of trust will ensure that such organizations are helped and are aided. Let me also thank all the members of parliament who have participated in today's event, and they have been with us since square one. When we were working on the legislation, we believe in their help. You know, to have collected 39 signatories, MPs, on the draft bill that does not necessarily and directly has to do with the wartime situation. It's a witness of the urgency of such legislation. We would like to thank the experts from the organizations, and there have been more than 100 of them. They have been working with us in working groups, in working cities through different workshops, resulting in 2 draft legislations. One will suggest amendments to the taxation code, to the financial code, the other. To conclude, this event would not have happened without an ample aid by the American people through the UAID. But in the first place, were it not that today's participants have come today either virtually or offline, thank you very much, and will contribute to the victory of Ukraine in the future. Thank you and goodbye.
Важливо природу свого містечка, але держава самостійно стягує податки та розподіляє їх.
The state exempts taxation and we don't control how the money is spent. The mechanism of interest deduction will regulate that. Everyone can direct 2% of the taxations paid to specific non-profit organizations. How can you get engaged in social changes? It is enough to enter the electronic cabinet of your taxpayer or go through other applications. There is a very important information to fill in, and you have to indicate the amount that will annually be deducted for the activities of the NGOs. Such a practice is helping the society in different societies in Europe, including Poland, Hungary, and other countries. NGOs will become stronger and more independent for everyone to change Ukraine for the better.